Thanks for joining us as we dive deep into all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. We have a loaded show today. No time to waste. A former prosecutor is in Studio C with what to expect if the Epstein grand jury transcripts are released. Spoiler alert, he says not much. He'll explain why. President Trump signing a bill permanently classifying fentanyl as a Schedule I drug. And three people who know all too well how dangerous the drug is were there at the White House. Greg Swan, Christine Bonds, and Rebecca Kiesling are in Studio C tonight talking about what this new law means to them. And political analyst S.E. Cupp joins us to talk about that, as well as the Epstein case. All that coming up in the next half hour right here. But we begin at the workplace because the Department of Labor is looking to rewrite or roll back dozens of regulations it says are obsolete. Now, keep in mind, these have several steps to go through, including a public comment period. So it's not set in stone, but let's run through some of the big ones that could affect all of us, starting with home health care workers. They help elderly or medically fragile people with everything from cooking food and giving medicine to even using the bathroom. The department's considering eliminating the minimum wage, which could mean millions could be paid less than $7.25 an hour if they aren't covered by state laws as well. Now, they also want to roll back protections for migrant workers, including one that requires employer-provided transportation to have seat belts and protecting them from retaliation if they file a complaint or take part in an investigation. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, is also looking to roll back a requirement that companies provide adequate lighting at construction sites. They say it doesn't substantially lower a significant risk. They also want to limit the authority of mining safety and health administration district managers for things like requiring changes to mine health and safety training programs. Turning now to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation, the Department of Justice announcing today it wants to interview this woman, his former girlfriend and confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell. You might remember Ghislaine was convicted of helping Epstein sexually abuse underage girls. They're working with her attorneys to arrange a sit-down with her. But here's the thing. The House Oversight Committee wants to talk to her, as well as some Republicans, even pushing a resolution calling for the files to be released. House Speaker Mike Johnson is making sure that doesn't happen by sending lawmakers to summer break early.
There's no purpose for Congress to push an administration to do something that they're already doing. And so this is for political games.
Now, this comes as the Justice Department pushes to have grand jury testimony in the Epstein case unsealed. Joining us now to talk about what we can expect, former Macomb County Assistant Prosecutor and Attorney Derek Miller. And it's good to see you, Derek. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse tonight.
Roop, great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
It's always good to see you. Wow, this is something that a lot of people are waiting for with bated breath. But Derek, you've seen a time or two what happens with these grand juries. You're saying don't hold your breath. It may not be all that exciting. Why?
Well, first, you got to realize the grand jury, you don't have typical hearsay rules. So you can have the lead investigator, federal agent, testify to basically the testimony of every witness in the case in front of that U.S. attorney to that grand jury. And you don't have to bring in all the witnesses like you would. They don't have the defense attorney doesn't have a right to be there sitting next to his client. So you don't have to have a lot of detailed testimony to prove this case because that hearsay rule doesn't pertain to the case.
It doesn't apply necessarily. I want to ask you what you think. I mean, I know the world of law and politics, they intersect, and they do in this case here.
Boy, do they ever.
Boy, do they ever.
Right.
When you have Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, saying, hey, we want to look at these grand jury transcripts, and you have really the federal government at this point saying, why don't we take a look at what Ghislaine Maxwell has to say? Is this in an effort to show that the Trump administration is doing something, or is this in earnest actually doing something?
Well, I think it's doing something, but is it doing enough? And why aren't they just releasing the files that they have? I don't think you're going to get a lot from the transcripts that were created because of what we just discussed. But you're trying to eliminate and extinguish one fire politically by getting the base and the conservative right who are demanding these files and transcripts to be released. You're kind of hushing them up a little bit, but you're still going to be, I think if the judge ultimately agrees that Federal Rule 6E, which governs in this case why transcripts should be released that are typically sealed, if those transcripts are released, then they're probably not going to be satisfied. that would be my initial thought on the matter.
I want to ask you this, though, because we know that initially Attorney General Bondi was saying, hey, look, we have all this stuff. The files are on my desk, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to release them. And then the whole problem here, the reason, if anyone has been not tuning into this, the reason that people are upset is because all of a sudden those followers of Donald Trump, many of those MAGA followers said, hey, we want to see this. And all of a sudden they're saying, you know what, we're not going to release them all. Is that where there could be a smoking gun?
I think there could be. It's a made-for-TV drama, right? I mean, look at the people involved here. Epstein's original attorney in 2008, Ken Starr, who, as we know, led the Clinton investigation against Monica Lewinsky. He led a scorched earth kind of campaign not to allow Epstein, his client, to get charged. You have Miss Maxwell's attorney, who is a famous professor and attorney himself. You have Acosta, who was a U.S. attorney in 2008 for Florida, who originally gave immunity to Epstein during the state charges, which later became, 10 years later, Trump's labor secretary, who then resigned. And then the Manhattan prosecuting attorney, the U.S. attorney in Manhattan, brought the more severe charges against Epstein. It's just a soap opera, and we're waiting to see what happens next.
There's a lot of tendons that connect all of these folks over the course of history.
It's crazy. You have, sex, politics, at the highest levels, people with, crazy amounts of money and influence involved. It's fascinating.
And I know that President Trump has said, look, I discontinued my friendship with Epstein, during this whole saga. And he was pretty vocal about it back then in the early 2000s. However, the interesting thing that I think a lot of people are looking at right now from a political view is him basically saying, let's not take a look at this, and also calling some of his followers who were very loyal to him weaklings for being interested in that.
Losers.
Well, and he said they were weaklings, but he was talking about the people who actually are his followers who are saying, we want to know what's in there.
Yeah, and that's what the judge that ultimately, the federal judge that heard the original grand jury, is going to have to determine. He's going to have to weigh, why are these cases usually in secret? They're to bring witnesses forward that don't want to testify, that you would hopefully would gain more truthful testimony. And they don't have to be afraid that everybody's going to find out what they say unless there's a trial. You have people that are relying on that trustworthiness, that secret, also that's supposed to promote trustworthiness and people coming forward. But you also have the people, the general public's idea of, can we trust the American institutions? And so the judge has to weigh these factors under the Rule 6E, and he has to decide.
And you wonder how interesting or interested people are going to be come midterm time, because, of course, this news cycle, as we always talk about, is so quick, so robust. But this is an important story today. Perhaps it won't be tomorrow, but we're going to watch this very closely. We thank you, Derek Miller, attorney, for joining us here on The Pulse tonight.
Appreciate it.
I don't think Saturday Night Live is going to be calling you anytime soon for your
either.
work. But
it's great.
You were able to pull off one invitation. Thank you, Derek, for your time today. The border was a huge issue during the election, in part because of this drug, fentanyl. 3 parents who lost children to it join us to talk about this new law President Trump signed. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. This helps everybody. We'll explain next on The Pulse. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now are 3 people who know all too well about the dangers of fentanyl: Christine Bonds, Greg Swan, and Rebecca Kiesling. All of them have lost children to the drug, and we thank all 3 of you for joining us here tonight. There's no other way outside of beginning with your children to begin this segment, because I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you can't get on board with what the Trump administration did with this particular law to make fentanyl into what it is supposed to be, which is a Schedule I drug, then perhaps you got to check your patriotism and your humanity. So we're going to begin with the children. I want you to tell me a story about your kids. We'll begin, of course, with Greg and Christine.
Well, Christine, you told me, pick up the phone. It's 12:30 at night. That's bad news, because it was the second call. It was my son, Jack. And I said, okay, I picked it up, and he blurted out, Dad, are you sitting down? Are you sitting down? I said, yeah, and shock started to go through me. And I sat up, and he said, Drew's dead. And that marked a before and after period in our life. Mm-hmm. Christine says I was crying in the tub for 5 years. I mean, I was a zombie and it was bad. I loved this kid. He was beautiful, he was brilliant, he was a great athlete, and he was, my best friend when he was a little guy coming up, and I poured everything I had into him about that. And I'm just glad I'm a believer. I believe I'll see him again in heaven, but it's really tough to get over. So we're happy, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about what we're doing in the schools later to advocate, because parents find purpose in their son's passing if they're able to go into schools and tell their story.
And Christine, you've seen your husband change with the mission that he has put together to help stave this off and make sure that no other parent has to deal with this.
Yes, since 2023, we have put all our effort into building this foundation that is led by bereaved parents, and it's a nonprofit organization, and we have been educating and empowering our youth, our communities to prevent fentanyl tragedies, and then expecting the unexpected happens, and we get a call from the White House, and it's to join the Trump administration in the effort to pass this bill, and it's remarkable.
It is certainly remarkable. Rebecca Ghislaine, your two sons also victims of fentanyl. We lost those two angels. Talk about them for a moment.
So Caleb was 20 and Kyler 18. Almost 5 years ago, they died along with 17-year-old Sophia Harris from fentanyl poisoning, not an overdose. It's murder, and it's a war that nobody wanted to acknowledge for years until now. And so Trump 2.0 is really doing a lot more. When I met President Trump at the White House, the other day I told him, "You're avenging my son's deaths." And it was really bittersweet being there, because when my children were young, I travel speaking, doing the pro-life activism, and I had my children in DC, and we were supposed to visit the White House, but the approval didn't come in on time, and so instead we visited the Congress building, and we also went to the National Archives, and my son was so excited to buy a copy of the Declaration of Independence, just like in the movie National Treasure.
But
and
they got to, through you, the honor of your visit, you honor their memory, but in a way that's really important. And we should mention that this particular bill that was signed into law by President Trump essentially makes fentanyl-related substances and fentanyl as a class into the Schedule 1. And that's really important of the Controlled Substance Act. And I want to ask specifically, Rebecca, how this would have avenged or prevented, I should say, your own son's deaths.
Okay, so the issue is having all of the analogs added to the Schedule 1, because my sons, just like so many other victims, had multiple analogs in their toxicity report as part of their autopsies. And if you can't prove that a Schedule 1 drug killed them, that could affect the prosecution and getting a jury verdict. We do have a drug-induced homicide law here in Michigan, but you know, this whole Schedule 1 issue, it's been a cat and mouse games where the cartels and the chemists, they keep creating new analogs that are much, much stronger than fentanyl. Some as 100 times stronger. And
Carfentanil.
yeah, carfentanil, and my son had that in his system. And then they don't get the prosecution like they should. Now this gives a mandatory minimum of 10 years. If you're basically dealing in fentanyl, if you have at least 100
Yes.
grams.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so important, is that this does, as you told the president, avenge your son's deaths, and of course your son as well. Christine, you are now taking the mission with your husband to schools all across Metro Detroit. Talk for a moment about how important this change is as you go about talking about this to schools and students.
Well, yeah, that's a great question. It's very important. I mean, it raises the threshold relative to the time that could be spent in prison, a minimum of 10 years. For folks that are caught. And when we get into schools, again, it's so important that we're collecting results so that when we leave a school, children know the danger of taking one unprescribed pill, that it can kill them. And we're also just very focused on making sure that the entire family which is an entire family that's bereaved, is also taken into consideration. And that's why we, brought our angel army to D.C. to say, President Trump, you want to hear these stories? Our business model is sharing heartfelt stories for every person that loses their life to this.
And Greg, what was the president's reaction when all of you were able to tell your stories?
He was fantastic. It was a little surreal and over the top, but he shook our hand. I was honored that he had me come up and speak, and he said, your child did not die in vain. And he got behind the Angel Army, which we brought to D.C., and fentanylfathers.org started angelarmy.com, and we're taking bereaved parents and giving them a purpose to go into schools, and they love it. And I said to him, I said, look, you don't get the attention of the audience without the bereaved parent. That's the secret sauce. And he said, you got that right. He goes, they don't pay attention to anybody but a bereaved parent they really listen to. And he took time to meet all the people in the audience. He was phenomenal, and we were really, really grateful for that. And he gave it a lot of national push.
Well, and I think it got a lot of national attention. And Rebecca, I think you pointed out that that's silly cold cam, kiss cam ended up taking over the news cycle for a moment. But here we are tonight talking about it. And I'm sure on this, your birthday, by the way, you get to celebrate something, not just your own life, but also this particular bill.
Yeah, it's a week from today will be 5 years since losing my son. And it's still hell on earth.
Sure.
It really is. And it's this just bizarre time in our nation's history where you had over 100,000 dying every year, more than all of the last several wars put together, but nothing was being done about it, and nobody was acknowledging that this was a war until just this year.
And it just now in earnest begins with the fight, and it will of course continue. And we thank all three of you for joining us here on the set to talk about this very important topic. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you can't get on board with this, then you got to check yourself. Very, very important work that you all are doing. Thanks for your time here tonight. We're diving back into the Jeffrey Epstein case from a political standpoint. Political analyst S.E. Cupp joins us to talk about the fallout. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This, my friends, is The Pulse. The news cycle never stops. And joining us now is a familiar face to many of you, S.E. Cupp. She hosted the show Battleground during election season. And, of course, she's a very well-known political analyst all over cable news and in so many other publications as well. And it's always good to talk to you, S.E. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thanks for having me. As always, it's great to talk to you.
Essie, the last time you and I talked was here in Michigan at Mackinac Island, and you were speaking at the conference, and it just has stuck with me, and I mentioned this on this program a few times. You said, I'm a conservative. I don't know if any of you remember what that is, because everybody who seems to be a former Republican is now a MAGA Republican, but you'd like everyone to know that there are still conservatives out there in this country that don't necessarily see eye to eye with President Trump, but are still Republicans.
Yeah, this is an existential kind of, question a lot of us have had, folks who are conservative but can't vote for Donald Trump or can't support, the current crop of Republicans. What do we do? Where do we go? And for some people, that's, they become Democrats. And I understand that you want to be with a party and maybe you think Trump and Republicans are so bad, you've got to join the other party. But I'm not for Democratic policies either. So I'm like a lot of people, politically homeless, orphaned. And it's frankly why a lot of people are, looking at third-party options and hoping something else comes along that they can vote for again, something with principles, something that's also practical, something that is solutions-based. We haven't seen a lot of solutions-based politics in a long time.
I find that interesting because our last segment we were talking, of course, about fentanyl and the border, and such an important topic, especially for those parents who joined us to talk about their own children they lost. Do you think that in the noise of Trump criticism is lost somewhere in there the progress that's been made to help families like they did with the Fentanyl Act?
Well, absolutely. And, this was the premise in part of Donald Trump's immigration policy when he was a candidate, that part of the reason he wanted to get illegal immigration under control was because of fentanyl coming across the borders. That really resonated with a lot of people. I'm in a very safe town. We don't have a drug problem in my town, but we do in the next town over. And our towns and cities don't have walls and gates. So everyone has a connection to fentanyl, and everyone's worried about it. So that was a very human face of a political, policy problem like immigration that really worked for Trump and Republicans. And I think in some of the optics of the raids and some of the questions over the constitutionality and illegality of the deportations, you're losing some of the solutions, the problem solving in some of this. And that's really just as important.
I want to talk to you about another important topic that has become important in the political world. Jeffrey Epstein, you've been following this very closely. What do you make of this cooperation that we're seeing from Attorney General Bondi and this, unsealing perhaps of the grand jury testimony? All of this, is this all optics and a move to make it seem like the Trump administration is doing something, or is this really progress?
I don't think it's progress, and I don't think. Listen, for a couple of reasons, I don't think the people who want answers the most are going to be satisfied. For one, conspiracy theorists are never satisfied. They're not there to solve problems or solve a mystery. They're there for the conspiracies. And so you can show them one thing, another thing, another thing. They're not generally going to believe it unless it affirms their preconceived notions. For another, MAGA conditioned this audience to believe they were going to get video, a list, and all of their political adversaries that they've ever had were going to go down in this. I'm not sure that's going to happen. And the third problem is Trump might be implicated in this. And so, they're probably never going to get a full picture of this story. And I think that's going to create more frustration and more conspiracy theories.
I want to ask you about whether or not you think there's a smoking gun anywhere in this at all.
One might exist. I don't know that we'll see it. And if we see it, I don't know how impactful that will be on MAGA voters. And when you talk about these issues like Epstein, which doesn't really impact anyone's daily life unless you were trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein or you're in a concentric circle of relation to Jeffrey Epstein. Your life is really not impacted by this, but we're all, incredibly invested, and both parties are very invested. And so I'm sure there is a smoking gun, but Sure. The point for a lot of people is the partisanship. I don't know that anything could come out that would meaningfully impact politics, and by that I mean change an election. The closest election we have to right now is the midterms. That's still 15 months away. That's a lifetime. It's really hard for me to see a way in which Epstein, whatever we learn, impacts that election 15 months from now.
This news cycle is moving so quickly and at such a rapid clip. It's like drinking from a fire hose, as we say. So clearly this may mean nothing in a matter of a few months here. But you know what, SC, as we head towards those midterms, we hope we can join you again and you can lend some of your knowledge to us here on The Pulse. We always love to see you.
Of course, anytime. I'm happy to be here with you, Roop.
That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you.